and welcome back to the Book and Life podcast. Today we're going to have a brand new book guest on. Whether they're an author, an editor, a producer, you'll never quite know, so you're in for one hell of a ride. But today I just have to do the adverts and then I'll get us straight into that most important conversation. And as we do every week, I'm going to read The Shadow, which is part of the Time Guardian series, and this is book 4 from Marianne Curley. The battle is over, the war is won. The prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan, struggling to cope with tragic loss. At odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping at shadows and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for the goddess Athena's death, Giselle swears revenge, to vilify the immortals' plan for world domination. But Giselle hadn't planned on love, and that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart, or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the guard and the order battle through the past and into an impossible future, darkness lurks round every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend or foe who stands in the shadow? And just a reminder that The Price of Freedom by Rosemary Rowan, is being donated to the Ukraine refugee crisis. And here's the blurb for her book. It's one of her Roman British crime series, which was written under her maiden name. All editions can be found online where all books are sold, even her agents donating her commission. Sorry, I don't have the blurb for that, but that's what she's doing. And now, without further ado, let's get you to the guests. Well, guys, I promised an incredible writer, and I feel like I have really delivered for you guys today, because we have got Suzeanne Barr here today, who is an exceptional ghostwriter. Exceptional. So I cannot wait to get her perspective on things. I can't wait to let her introduce you guys to the world of ghostwriting and what that means. You all know I've been busy working with a script doctor, so it's lovely to have a different kind of writer in today. And let's just have some fun. Suzanne, what do you think?
Hey, I'm game for just about anything.
Yeah, but we
game.
have to be. We're writers. We have to
Right.
be. I always say that.
You have to be open for just about anything and everything, and there's nothing off the table, in my opinion, that you can't write about or,
Exactly.
make as a character.
Exactly. So tell our audience a little bit about what's a ghostwriter, what your responsibilities are, and a little bit about some of your more well-known work that you've been involved in.
Well, being a ghostwriter, in my story here, was a kind of a fluke thing. I was writing for a newspaper and magazines, and I owned a bookstore. And while I was doing a book review for a very well-to-do author, very well-known, I should say, I sent her my book review copy, little clip from the actual newspaper back then. This was in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And we became friendly. And they had a company that had used ghostwriters before. And one thing led to another. I became friends with this person, and they asked me would I like a job. And I'm like, okay, what? And she said, would you like to write some of my books? And I'm like, well, I don't know if I can or not. I had read this author for years and years and admired her very much, but I wasn't quite sure that I was up to that task. But she said, send me a sample. Do you have any novels that I could look at? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So again, I had to mail it via regular good old snail mail. to
Gosh, I
her.
remember those days. Yeah, I
I
do
know
actually.
it
Yeah.
was bad, and a manuscript is so thick and everything. But I said, okay, I'll do it, and I really didn't think too much of it. And I had been out of town for a week or so on vacation. When I came home, there was this message on my answering machine. It's Suzanne, you have to call me. It's urgent. So I called the gal that I was my friend by this point, and she said, "I loved that book." She said, Your writing is excellent." And I said, "Well, thank you." And she said, "Also, my publisher thinks that is an excellent book as well, and I would like you to come to work for me. We have to, get through a little bit of a red tape situation, but would you like to
Mhm.
come and work for me?" And I'm like, "Well, sure." I just thought maybe I'd be editing her work, or just maybe giving her some ideas, helping out here and there where I could. But I was offered to take the whole thing over on my own, write the books about the topics that I wanted to. And I said, well, yeah, who wouldn't? I can have all the
Exactly.
fun without out the work part of what, you go out, you do book sightings and, TV, magazine appearances. And I'm like, well, I'll be happy to do that, since I don't really like getting out there in the public so much as far as book signings go.
I don't blame you for that. I had to get used to that very quickly in my own career, and
Yeah,
I
well,
just didn't realize like how you never realize how much it's going to actually take out of you. Go to all these different towns and do all these
hmm
talks and
oh
going to
yeah,
colleges and stuff. Nobody ever tells you that. No one ever explains
no,
the physical part.
it's a big task. It really is. On one of my own books called Fatal Kiss, a true crime story, I traveled up to North Carolina where the crimes took place, and it was a small town crime, but big news. It was national
Yeah.
news, and I wrote the book on it, and I was stalked by one of the girls whose brother was put to death in this
Wow.
story. He received the
Yeah.
death penalty, and it was scary. I
Of
had to
course it
have
would have been. Yeah.
sheriffs follow me around for a while, but that's part of it.
But that's part of it. Like I always say, I feel so lucky that I had done my dance career and my
hmm
acting stuff before I got into the author business, because I feel like almost I got all of the confidence, and I always call it the Teflon armor, where people, because all our stuff gets mud thrown at it. We all know
Oh
this.
yeah.
So like I have this kind of Teflon thing, and I'm very careful who I become friends with
hmm
now in the industry as well. So there's almost like this Teflon you've got to get through to kind of get to know me, and not me, the personality of the author, but me as the person.
Right.
And if I hadn't created that, I don't think I'd have lasted as long, because I I come from a small town, very judgmental small town, and
hmm
the first year I was out, I got trashed and trolled and stalked for the first year. And I'm
Oh,
like, this is insane. And of course, now that I'm doing the movie of one of my
hmm
books, that's actually slowly starting to come back. And I'm like,
yeah.
oh. So I feel really glad that I've got that kind of Teflon thing, and I can just almost write to my co-author and be like, I'm having a crap day here, because he doesn't get any of this. He's just a wrestler.
Yeah.
He's used to it. But I get all the stuff, and then I go to him and I'm like, this is insane. And he's like, chill, it's okay. These people don't matter. It's the ones that buys it. That's what matters. And he's so good at that. He's just so good at just taking me down a notch and being like, it's okay, trust me, it's okay. So yeah, I mean,
It is. It's
I've grown in
tough.
it.
It's a hard business to be in any form, as
Yeah,
far as I'm concerned, because there's a lot of competition, even
yeah,
in ghostwriting. I mean, I know several ghostwriters myself, and it's once an author finds a good ghostwriter, if that's the
yeah,
way they choose to go, then you're lucky. Consider
yeah.
yourself lucky. So, but it's been good to me. I can't say that I haven't enjoyed it. It's allowed me to travel places research. I bought an airplane for my husband for his birthday, which
Yeah.
he's obsessed with. But it's
Don't they all
we
get obsessed with these things though? Like,
yeah.
to be honest, my husband's obsessed with motorbikes, so
Mm.
it just seems to be like
Well,
a
that was
guy
his
thing,
first
to be honest.
obsession. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, he
yeah.
does. He when he was younger, he rode motorcycles. That he was known in his small town for doing wheelies and crazy stuff on
They're nuts.
motorcycles. And
Yeah.
as he, aged, he decided he's been a pilot for like 25 years. So
Wow.
now his passion is just flying airplanes. And I was afraid to fly, so I had to learn how to fly to overcome my fear of flying. But that's a whole other
Yeah.
story there. But yeah, it's a tough business to be in right now. And a lot, ever since the pandemic, a lot of people that were once in the office, they're gone. Like
Yeah.
some of the
So many's
editors, the
gone.
junior
It's
editors.
crazy.
Yeah. So you have to do a little more work yourself, I think,
Yeah,
on
like the marketing
projects.
teams I've noticed is just shrunk. Like
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
everyone is shrunk. And I mean, I took on a contract that said I'd put one book out a month for 3 years. And I signed this as a, one of a kind publishing deal because
hmm
this little publisher had survived the pandemic and they were looking to centralize their focus on a group of authors. It was so funny because my literacy agent actually mentioned your name to me. He was like, "You need to talk to this woman. She's incredible." And
About that.
oh no, he sung your praises. Eric Miller sung your praises, and he's because for
Oh, okay.
so long he's been like trying to get me to tell my story to someone, like my actual no bullshit story of
Yeah.
how I went from being that tiny sick kid to now writing books that are being made into Hollywood movies. And, you
Wow.
know, what was it like to grow up in hospital? What was it like to fight for your life and never know if you're going to make your next birthday and watching your
hmm
friends die and having, because I mean, I got what they called uh, survivor's guilt. I had that from like 4 or 5 years old,
Oh,
and
wow. That's
they didn't
terrible.
understand it and they didn't know it.
hmm
So to Eric and particularly my director who I'm working with now, they're all like,
hmm
"You got to sit down and you got to put this into a book so that people
Right.
can hear your story," because
hmm
it's I for years worked with islanders, people from the Shetlands, to try and show
hmm
them that there's a life outside the islands. But I also worked with the Arthritic Association to say, hey, even though we've got arthritis and it's debilitating as hell, you can still go on and do all of these other things that you want to do. You just need to learn how to work around your obstacles rather than trying
Yeah.
to just
Oh,
barrel
absolutely.
through.
hmm
And that was how your name came up to me. Was Eric
hmm
was like, you need to talk to Suzanne because to him this story was it made him cry when he read the outline of just my
Oh.
background.
hmm
He said he couldn't get through it without crying. And then when I sat down with the director, he said the same thing. He was like,
Oh, wow.
this is a story. So yeah, that's how I ended up connecting with you. And I thought
hmm
that I had to tell the story on here because I felt like if anyone would get it, like especially really traumatic, heart wrenching stories about journey
hmm
and never
hmm
giving up no matter what happened, that would be you, because of your
Well,
own history.
I have been down many paths
Yeah,
of life. I've been through a lot of illness myself when I was
yeah,
younger. And I still have a very rare blood disorder that somewhat like leukemia, only a little worse, if you could even
yeah.
imagine
I
that.
know the one you're talking about. Yeah,
But it hasn't really stopped me from living my life. If
no,
anything, having had that past, I think you have a little more vigor for life because you
yes,
don't take it for granted. Each day is important, and lucky that you're there or I'm there to live in the day and be a productive person.
yeah. Because one thing I noticed when I hit my teens, they call it the mortality syndrome, where you almost get scared that you have to cram everything you ever want to do into such a short window. And
hmm
then I kind of realized that all these predictions that these doctors had made was going to be wrong. And then I kind of got comfortable. And then about 3 years ago, I went through another really close call. And I'm like,
Oh,
okay, so I do need to live my life to the absolute fullest. So that kind of came
right.
back. And then I'd walked away from writing. I was like, okay, maybe this isn't for me. Just before the pandemic, I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
maybe I just need to take a time out, find
Right.
myself again. And the pandemic was like somebody slapped me in the face and went, no, you're not leaving this industry. You can't leave this industry.
Yeah.
And I just got pulled right back in. But I mean, it's crazy because even the people that I've grown up with, who've grown up watching me grow up, has
Hmm.
said they've literally just seen this huge transformation. Most people would have just quit. I mean, one of the things that I talked about recently was there was a very small group of us that were on the same rotation in hospital because I lived in a
Hmm.
cancer ward because of the kind of condition I have.
Oh
Basically, my
gosh.
immune system was not allowed to be active. So they kept me in this ward, and there's none of us left now. It's just me.
Oh my gosh.
And they were talking about, talking to the therapist and kind of learning about all the different things that made me quirky, or at least quirky as they called me as a teenager, actually made me understand like my ego, why I wanted to be a performer, why I needed to do certain things, or why I acted certain ways. And now I can look back and I can almost share that story with people and say, if your kid's doing this, it's because they're suffering from anxiety, but they
Hmm.
just obviously. Kids don't know how to tell you that.
Right.
So that was, I think that's why everybody kind of, anyone who's around me says, someday sit down and just work with a ghostwriter and tell your story.
And right. Yeah. Well, that's what we do.
Yeah,
You have to know the person and what they want told, how they want it told, and it's
yeah,
a ghostwriter for nonfiction is totally different than for fiction, which I
of
do the
course. Yeah.
fiction, but it's a big task, and even though your name isn't on that book, you've put
Oh no,
tons of
I'd
hours.
put you on as ghost written by.
Oh no.
That's a totally different scenario for me.
Well, it is. It's just it's and sometimes like the books are on the bestseller list. There's one out there now that is, and you
Yeah,
can't claim that you wrote that book because that's
no,
in your contract to say you can't do that. You can't
yeah,
reveal this
exactly.
that you work for A, B, C, and D. And that's fine. I don't have a big ego in that
No,
regard. Uh, but I do kind of, I think, have a reputation as being aggressive when I need to be, and sometimes it has paid off, and I'm not shy about promoting things that I do myself with I did some work with the ID channel. I don't know if you guys get that over there, the
no,
investigation
but
discovery.
because I have so many American friends, particularly wrestling friends, which is a whole other story for a whole other day. Yeah, they tell me a lot about the different networks and different channels.
Yes.
And I was so
Yeah.
lucky because growing up, when I wanted to go into writing, I was 18, I was looking into it. And at the age of 19, I actually studied under Vince Russo for a while, who was a
Really.
very famous wrestling
Hmm.
writer. I'm not
Hmm.
sure if you've heard his name,
I think
but
I have.
yeah,
My
he's got a
father-in-law
reputation. Yeah, he's got a
My
reputation.
father-in-law was a huge wrestling fan. I mean, beyond big time. That he loved it. So he's
That
no
was the thing
longer
for
with
me as
us.
well.
Yeah.
I was this girl. Like I started watching wrestling at 4, and it was crazy because we were just a bunch of kids in the hospital, and
Hmm.
we most of the time we were hooked up to stuff, and we couldn't go anywhere, and we couldn't do anything. And so the boys came in, and they would come in with like ECW DVDs and tapes, the old
Hmm.
VCR tapes and
Right.
shoot interview tapes and all this sort of stuff. So I got sucked into wrestling really young. And then my brother, he was 5 years older than me. He really got into it. So every Monday and Friday night, we would, trade with the other kids at school to get these VCR tapes.
Oh
And
my
it's so
gosh.
weird now that I look back, I've never ever claimed not to be a wrestling fan. But I
Hmm.
look back at my hometown, and so many of them will say, I've never watched wrestling. I've never watched wrestling. And I know they did because I
Well,
got tapes off them.
I think sometimes there's kind of a stigma
Yeah.
attached to liking that. And here in the United States, if you like NASCAR, which it's not my
Huge, yeah.
thing, but I have
No, it's
nothing
not my
against
thing
it.
either, but I get it,
That
yeah.
or wrestling, they think you're a redneck or but
Hmm.
it's you do what you do for yourself, and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. Or that's
It's
kind
so
of my
funny that you say that because when me and my husband got together, he said you're a closeted American because I love horse riding, I love pickup trucks, and I love shotguns, and I love wrestling. And to me,
well,
that was just who I am. And I was like,
mhm.
well, if I'm gonna get that nickname, then I'm gonna feed off it. I'm gonna play into it.
Right,
And
right.
it's funny because I look at like one of the people I worked with for a very short period of time was Eric Bischoff because we were going to do a reality show together, and I like him a lot. I just
Hmm.
struggled with him because I think it was we were from two very 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 different worlds and we had two very very different opinions. But I like him in the regards that he could look at something and see the value in it, and he did see
Hmm.
value in me. So I'm almost now curious to see what his take's going to be when this movie drops, because he always told me romance and wrestling does not work, and he always told me dancing and wrestling don't work.
Hmm.
And of course, I'm the epitome of going from the dance industry, where
Right.
I brought Lepache, which is a beautiful French dance style, back,
Hmm.
and I brought that to the clubs here in the UK, and then I went on and I kind of expanded on it. And it's weird because
Hmm.
wrestlers look at what we did on the floor and have a unique respect for us because it does have a lot of stage fighting in it, and it does have a lot of you have to be really choreographed or things
Right.
go wrong.
Yes.
um so yeah, it's weird. Like I almost am interested now to see how that's gonna thread through the
Well,
industry.
in the I've been in the business a long time, probably close to 30 years, and I've always been a reader. I've always loved books of just about any kind. And in my experience, publishing goes through phases
Yeah.
just like a person. There or a fad. It's
Yeah.
there was a point when the male character was a football player, then a
Yep.
police officer, and then it just went up the ladder to we've done that, something new, we've done that, we need something new to do differently now. Make him the big rich office guy,
Yep.
and I think at this point now, the way the publishing industry is, I think you can write just about anything, and if it's good
Yeah.
and you've put your heart and your soul into it, I think editors, publishers can see that on your paper, on your screen, whatever, and know. And that stuff, I don't think it matters anymore now. We've just kind of
Yeah.
evolved from Harlequin romance, and nothing against Harlequin
No,
romance
I
because
mean,
they're
I,
one
I
of the
had respect for those
biggest
people a lot. Yeah.
publishers in the world. Oh, I do too. But you it's kind of these formulaic stories that people
Yep.
love. I am not a big fan of romantic comedies. I've written several of them. One, and my husband loves them. He
Yes.
loves the Hallmark Channel, the Christmas movies, and I just roll my eyes. But I
Yeah, I
don't
did
think
too. I
now.
can't do Hallmark.
No, it's too stupid for me, and I'm just And he's like, "Well,
And
you
we've
write
been in
that
the
stuff."
industry, so we can almost tell where the stories are going within the
Yeah.
first 5 minutes.
Well, you do
Yeah.
because there is a formula. I mean, it's like it's when I read, and I love to read. Usually by when I'm a third of the way in the book, whatever it is, I've already got it solved. It pisses me off because it's
I'm the
like,
same way as you. Yeah. I'll
damn,
suggest
I
some
didn't
names to
want to
you that
know.
Yeah, but I'll
Yeah.
suggest some crime names to you that you will
Okay.
adore because you will not see it coming. Honestly,
Okay.
I have some authors that you'll adore.
Good. Good.
But what I love about you is I love that you're aggressive because you're a lot like me. You're so
Mhm.
driven. And there's
Mhm.
not many of us now in this industry that is as driven as us.
Yeah.
Because, like, I look at you, you understand Turner Publishing, which,
Mhm.
everyone knows. Anybody that knows anything about TV or publishing, Turner
Mhm.
Publishing is also Turner Media, who owns
Right.
TABS and TNT.
Mhm.
So I always thought it was funny that this company never put together the romance and the wrestling in one kind of series or books, because what people don't realize is there's a shit ton of female wrestling fans now. Like,
Oh, I
it's a
know. I know
thing.
there
It's a
is.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just talking about this the other day where I'm like, I was talking about it with my agent actually, where I'm seeing a lot of more female readers talking to me and saying, do these wrestlers even know what sort of attraction they have to me?
Mhm.
And I'm having to explain to them, no, they don't think about the female audience really at all. They're thinking of their stories, their characters, what they're doing in the ring, what they're doing to push that whole kind of narrative forward. They don't,
Right.
they don't take the time to say, well, if I get a tattoo that draws my eye down to certain areas, will that affect somebody? Like, but
Right.
it's not just like that. There's all these other sort of little stories that creeps out of like backstage, like piercings in places that can't really be
Mhm.
named, or the women talk, so the stories come out about, well, this person's like this or this person's like that.
Right.
And so many of them will come up to me because they do know I work with Joe, and they do know that I
Mhm.
have friends in wrestling, other friends in wrestling. So they'll come up and they'll ask me questions like, well, Crystal, you went down and wrote a wrestling show. How was it backstage? And I went, and most of the time I lie and say, oh, it was great.
Mhm.
But because you protect the industry, whatever
Well,
industry you're
yeah.
in, you
Sure.
protect the industry, right?
Mhm.
And I laugh because there's almost that insecurity factor I have, because
Uh
I
huh.
don't want to upset them because these are my real friends, but at the same
Right.
time I'm like, this is my job. I have to promote this very much sexier take on a profession that's
Right.
generally seen as violent and hardcore and all this kind of stuff. So
Right.
it's weird. I feel like I'm treading water into this now. Like 10 years ago, nobody wanted to hear anything about wrestling romance, wrestling erotica,
Right.
any of that. And now I'm getting asked to go to colleges and universities and libraries to do these talks on it. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, it's almost like I don't know where to put my feet. I'm almost like scared because it's like I'm walking such a thin line of, I want to be honest with the romance readers and the erotica
Mhm.
readers, but at the same time I'm like, wrestling's its own beast. I don't want to upset anyone. So yeah, and that's
Well, I think.
particularly what I found writing the books, because I'm like, that's why I would sit with wrestlers and I would pick their
Mhm.
brains all the time, because I can't put together a wrestling match because I've never been in the ring. So
Yeah.
I don't want to, make a foo-fa and bugger
Yeah.
it up, So I
Yeah.
used to sit with Joe and I'd be like, okay, I need a wrestling match for, that has this, this, and this in it. Can I get away with it? And then he would write me a
Mhm.
scene, and I would go in, I would use that. But he never wanted anything to do with the wrestling erotica. So like, he's like, I don't want my name on it. Just you take my scenes, do whatever you want with them. And I was like,
Yeah.
awesome. But I also get flack too because one of the most famous scenes that I ever put in a book was the book's no longer out anymore, but I am planning to relaunch it. It's called Fighting for Him, and this girl's just so attracted to this guy, this wrestler, and she
Mhm.
just doesn't really understand the rules, and she keeps having these very steamy dreams about them. And one of the scenes that I did was he's like just sitting in the ring almost, and he's she ends up sort of kind of handcuffing him to the ropes in the corner, and she's trying to be all cute and sexy, and she takes out a lollipop and she teases this guy with a lollipop. And when my editor read it, she blew. She was like, this is the hottest thing I've ever read. Where did you get this idea from? And I'm like, actually, I don't know. It just sort of happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's weird because there used to be two writers, myself and Laurie Carrington. Carrington, not Mick Carrington like me, but Carrington.
Right.
And we were the only two that had ever really explored mixing very high intense romantic scenes with wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And now that attitude's changing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so weird. I mean, I think our books could have been big back in the Attitude Era if we had been, if I had been of age to write it, but also if I had known, the right people. And I think that's something else I've learned is you need to know the right people to kind of get.
You do, I think you do. And, I always say in my own situation, I was at the right place at the right time, but nothing just was dumped in my lap. I had to earn it. And once I get past the first time I ever was asked to do this and they published the book. Every time the second contract would come, you would think, well, can I do this? Can I do it again? And I'm still that way. And I've written 54 novels. I think, it's about 54, I think. And, and each time, whatever's going on in the world, and this is from my publisher's viewpoint, and I don't necessarily always agree with it because I think some of it's stupid, but whatever's going on in the world, get a little bit of that in your story. And if you've got something that's way off the scale, they like that. They like that. Like, I've never read any books with a wrestler as a character or anything. So I think that somebody's got to be the first person to break the mold and go out and, put it out there. And I think people were open to that.
Yeah, and I mean, especially when we look at the market now, sports romance has done so much change to the romance industry.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing an uptake in female viewers of wrestling because it's not just a case of, oh, well, they're sitting with their boyfriends watching it or their husbands watching it. But there's actually females that are going out and buying tickets and going and watching it. And it's not for girls fighting girls. There is a group of them that's going there to Google the Google the guys because it's that time of weird social media where it's so much easier for the wrestlers to create a connection with the female audience now compared to what it was 15, 20 years ago. And I keep trying to remind my friends of that. I'm like, you can get a large readership or a large group of females to support you by just tweeting people. Like if you have conversations with other females, if you have flirty conversations with other females, you generate that, oh, well, he does it with her, maybe he'll do it with me. And you kind of feed off of that frenzy almost. And what I love about Waking Up His Wife, and I'll share a little bit about what the story is about, is Anna is this really strong female character. She's very empowered. She's very driven. She gets pulled into wrestling by her dad, who thinks he's protecting her from their drunk mom. And she ends up just embroiled in wrestling. She grows up in wrestling with her brother. Her brother takes off and he marries the owner's daughter to another wrestling company. So she's left behind with her friends. And that being said, she ends up falling in love with this guy that she travels the roads with, that she's always gone with. For 11 months of the year, she's always gone, and she's always with him. And she kind of refuses to let herself fall in love with him because she doesn't want to be her mom and dad. She doesn't want to go down that road. Her dad dies in the ring. It's a very, very emotional kind of journey for her. But the flip side is her brother's super protective. He's super aggressive. He doesn't want her with anybody in wrestling. He's, he likes to control everything. He's a total egomaniac. And so that's the kind of threat the whole way through. And you kind of follow the story of, will Adam and Anna finally get together? And if they do, what's that going to mean for their small group of friends?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I just absolutely adore that sort of story. And
Yeah.
I thought no wrestler's going to understand this. And then I started to send it to some of my friends, and they read it and they were like, "No, this is a really good story because you're showing a different side to wrestling that
Right.
nobody's seen before."
Yeah.
But I'm still taking every other chance I have to loop in the romance group, all
Mm-hmm.
the romance readers in, because it's that romance story, that romance trope that everybody adores.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your emotional background, you've got what drives the character. You can tell all of these things,
Mm-hmm.
but you still have that power throughout. So my hope when this comes out as a film, that
Right.
it will have a positive impact on the industry, kind of like what we saw with 50 Shades of Grey, because with 50 Shades of Grey, it opened that door that erotica was acceptable. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping that this is going to show that there's other sports that will be classed as acceptable
Mm-hmm.
other
Right.
than football, basketball, and baseball. It will
Yes.
allow, because there is MMA love stories out there that's been bestsellers and everything. So why is MMA going to be so much more different to wrestling? Is kind of where was always my
Yeah.
argument, and it still kind of
Yeah.
is today. So I'm hoping this is going to break down some walls. So from your experience, because you've been in the business for 30 years, tell me, what do you think the reaction's going to be from from both sides, from the publishing and romance industry, in your opinion?
Well, as I said, it evolves. With the times, just like anything else does. And I was always told from agents, editors, publishers,
Yeah,
if you have a good story, that's what we want. We
mm-hmm.
don't care if your hero is a wrestler. We don't care if your heroine is a waitress. If you have a good story, it'll sell itself. It'll
Yeah,
sell itself. And I had an example of one of the novels I had written years and years and years ago, and I just had it sitting in a drawer. And my I had a writing group that we would meet and critique each other's work every couple of weeks or so. And, I would come home with practically tears in my eyes thinking, God, I'm such a shitty writer. And
I was the
it
same.
was,
I was the same
yeah,
because I was trying to do something that nobody'd ever done before, and they kept telling me it was too niche and there was no market for it. So yeah, I've been there.
yeah.
I get that better
Well,
than anyone.
you don't want to be a part of just one thing. I mean, the books I write, I know I write to a certain audience, but I know what I can and can't do and get away with. But this particular book that I wrote years and years ago, and had my critique group go over it, they just, this is awful. You need to do this, that. One of them was an English teacher. One was an elementary school teacher. I mean, they had good backgrounds and were
Yeah,
pretty, what I thought at the time, well versed in the business. A couple of them had published romance books. And, several years later, that particular story became I think it was number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list for
wow,
like 12 weeks. And it was
yeah,
kind of like ha ha or whatever. But you have to go with what you know you can do and what you feel that you're comfortable writing. And in doing so, that comes off on the page to the readers,
yeah,
or it has been to me because I've gotten a lot of feedback on things. I wrote one book where a girl was raped, and have
yeah.
heard from women where reading that helped me. Uh,
There is a
you
market
just
for it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, you just whether it's wrestling or I'm not going to go with the football, basketball stuff so much because I think that's been overdone. I mean, you can
it
have
really
your
has
son
now.
play
Yeah.
high school basketball, but your topic is not overdone. I don't know that it's been done. So I would say go for it. Why didn't I think of that? But
Yeah, I
now,
mean,
no, yeah, I think
when
it's a good subject.
yeah, like when I went to England, I never thought I was going to do wrestling romance. I never thought about it. And
Mm-hmm.
then I went down to England, and I was just writing a wrestling show. I went down there for that whole purpose, and just talking with the boys, that four group of guys who were from the States, who had been in some of the biggest wrestling companies in the world, and talking to them, and I was like, well, this could be fun. And they certainly gave me enough material in a one
I,
weekend stunt. And I'm like, this could be fun. And I started dipping my toe in, and so many of the big publishers, like, I'm not even joking. I had agents, I had big publishers tell me, this is too niche, it won't work, it can't sell, we don't know how to sell this. And I was so surprised. I was like, okay, like, even Mills and Boone said this was not something that would work.
oh, wow.
So I went and I got an indie contract, and I said, you know what, I'll do it myself then. And I have
Mm-hmm.
been changing minds one at a time, very slowly, but for over
Right.
10 years. Like, I've been pushing this sort of ball up the hill, and I think my husband thinks I'm crazy because I have just been pushing the same ball up the hill. But to me, though, now that Waking has been optioned and it's moving
Mm-hmm.
forward, that to me was like the biggest oh my gosh moment. Because this
Oh, yeah.
director read the original script before it's been
Mm-hmm.
doctored and you know worked on,
Right.
and he said, you really got something here. And he didn't read the novel. He didn't, I had written the screenplay myself, which is so different. If you're an author, you know this. Going from
Oh, yeah. I know
writing,
how to write a
yeah, a
screenplay. I know
book
what you're.
to writing a screenplay is like night and day. It's totally
Well,
different
yeah.
rules, the whole works. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as my script doctor reminds me, I am terrible for waffling in places, which you know we do as
Well,
authors. Um, but it's been. I just hope it makes other people who appreciate wrestling and appreciate romance not feel like their stuff only belongs on fan boards. Because there's whole
right. Right.
sites that is literally thousands of fan only sites. And on these sites, there's like, it's like the old forums that you used to get. Remember those days where you would go on the forums and it would be like Reddit
Yes.
and stuff? There's
Yes.
forums
Yes.
that's just set
Oh,
up for
wow.
people to share wrestling stories or wrestling
Mm-hmm.
fantasy stories. And I think
Yeah.
that was another thing that made me think, well, there is, if I can tap into that little group of people, that's the place that I need to go to get this moving. And I have been slowly getting some of the readers on the boards to check out stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. Like, I didn't just decide I'm going to do wrestling and romance. I decided I'm going to take two dancers who and then I created, working with Joe, I took an original story of two dancers who get involved in the creative industry and end up in this mess of just fame and all the seven sins that comes with being in this industry. And we
Right.
created a series, a 64 book series,
Jeez.
with the idea of it being a family driven drama that's centered around two girls who make their name as dancers, and then they end up in this world of, their dad was a professional wrestler and had lied to them their entire lives. And now, guess what? One of them's married to a wrestling owner, a company owner, and how this is all playing out, and how, you know, the guy that originally married this young twin, he was doing it to get back at his old friend. He was marrying his friend's daughter because he wanted to get back at him. Like, so it was a very kind of, we created a spider web idea. And that was
Mm-hmm.
the first time I really worked with a wrestler. And Joe's fantastic because he will sit for hours, and I mean hours, with me.
Really.
And we will go through very detailed, like, this is my scene issue. Can you help me get to this bit over here because I've written myself in a corner? Or he'll read something and he'll pull me back and say, you've come way too far, rein it in, and let's go again. So I'm
Well, you're
pushing the
lucky.
boundaries in every way I can at the
Yeah.
moment.
Well, you're lucky, number one, that you have a professional at your side
Yeah.
that can you don't have to Google it, basically,
Yeah.
because that's what a lot of us do, is Google all of our research. And if I can, and more often than not, I like to have a trip planned to the place I'm going to write about. And, I get pamphlets, take pictures, just do whatever I can to keep that place in my mind. And
Yeah, of course.
sometimes just Google isn't enough. You need to go there. And it's kind of, I would equate that with you having a professional at your side.
Yeah.
And it's, you're lucky.
I mean, I felt when I first started working with Joe, I thought this is either going to go really really well or this is going to go really bad. And I just had come back from a wrestling weekend that hadn't
Hmm.
gone. Oh, I mean, my best friend had the best time of her life, but professionally, I didn't feel like it was a great weekend because the company that had
Oh,
asked me to come
gosh.
down and write for them went under the day after I got back. And I was like,
Oh, my
oh,
gosh.
okay. And so I was like, well, maybe because I was looking to find my wrestling home. And I think that's one thing that
Hmm.
I can openly admit is I never felt like I belonged anywhere. Not in dance, not in sort of horse riding or anything I did. Even in acting, I didn't feel like I really fitted. And then I
Hmm.
started talking with wrestlers, and then I felt like I slowly was starting to sort of click in with them in a weird sort of
Yeah.
way. And Joe and me were like as if we've been friends for over 20 years. Like you hear us talk,
Oh.
we just finish each other's sentences. He knows exactly where I'm going to go before I go there. Um, and I went out to California because I wanted to figure out where I was going to put these twin sisters for their American side
Hmm.
because I set most of it in the town that I actually kicked my dance career off of in Aberdeen.
Oh, wow.
So
Oh, okay.
I went out to LA and we spent, I think it was close to a week in LA, and I took so many pictures and I visited
Hmm.
places, and I have friends that still live there, so they send me
Hmm.
news reports and videos all the time.
Oh,
And I was
wow. Well,
able to
you're
just,
lucky again.
yeah, and because I'd made those friendships, I was like,
Hmm.
thank goodness I have, because it just really concreted. That's why I don't Google. If I'm,
Hmm.
even when I wrote my crime novel, which is due out in a couple of years, I went and I got a hold of the one of the former detectives of the show, the first 48 hours.
Oh, yeah.
And I went
Yeah,
and
you
I got a
have to
hold
do
of him, and
that.
I'm like, I need you to read this and come back to me and tell me what you think. And I think I drove the poor man insane because I sent him so many different, well, is this the right procedure? And would you do this? And would you do that? And is this too gruesome? Is this, do you
Hmm.
feel this is too off putting? And he was really able to give me a kind of
Hmm.
whole new look at it. And I said it in the Shetlands, which,
Right.
at the time nobody was writing in Shetland. And now obviously Anne Cleeves is one of the
Hmm.
most famous writers coming out of there. Um,
Yeah.
and that was like what I learned. Research was like hugely important, and it's something I rely
Yeah.
on a lot because I don't think
Hmm.
you can really do anything justice unless you know what you're talking about and you really kind of dig
Oh, right.
into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I loved
I,
about yours, because that's exactly what you do. You have that passion that comes through from every single word.
well, Maybe, maybe in my nonfiction writing, if I had to be honest, I would say my heart is more with the true crime than it is with
Yeah.
my other half that does the fiction. But I always wanted to know what made a person do this.
Yeah.
Like in Fatal Kiss, that was such a story that I was on tons of television shows here, in the United States. We did all kinds of shows based on that book
Yeah.
because it was a story where a woman had killed one husband and hired a guy to kill her other husband. I think it was the fourth husband and the 4-year-old stepchild.
Yeah, that was awful.
So it was kind of, and I interviewed everybody, the prosecutors, the district attorney, the cops, the family members of that were involved with the crime. And it took me about a year, I think, to get all of the stuff together to write the book, because it's at the time St. Martin's Press wanted the book,
Yeah.
and I was under contract with my other work that had to be in on such and such a date. So I wound up putting them off to the side for a while. And when the time came for me to send the manuscript to St. Martin's, they had kind of gone off of the idea. So
Yeah.
I invested a lot of my money and had it published myself. I mean, I didn't, go on Amazon or however you self publish a book now. I don't even know how, but I went to a publishing company and had them, spit
Make
out
it.
a
Yeah.
few copies, and it was a bestseller on Amazon. So it's that's where my heart is when it comes to writing, because that's facts, that's right there. And in this book, Fatal Kiss, I was lucky to have met Anne Rule before she died,
Yeah.
and she gave me some tips on what to do when you're writing a true crime book. So I was lucky. I sold all the books and got a lot of play, and still do get a lot of. And that was, I think it was in 2003
Yeah.
that I wrote that book. So it's 20 years. It still has a life. So that's where my heart is. Now, ghostwriting it's fun in the sense that in my case I can kind of do what I want, but I know what my limits are as far as
Yeah.
you can't say prick or dick, but you can say the F word.
Yeah.
I mean,
The
it's
rules
like,
we
well,
have is ridiculous. Yeah.
well, it is. It's
Yeah.
stupid, and I'm not saying that the F word isn't in the books, because it is. But
Mhm.
when you change editors, and some are one way and some are
I
another
always
way,
get
and
you're too crass. I always get that from my steamy seeds. They'll say, "Oh, it's incredible, but you're too crass," and I'm like, well,
yeah,
who's
well, mine
thinking
is you're
about
too dark.
poetic language at a time like that?
Hmm.
You want it realistic, don't you? And then they're like,
Well,
no, no,
yeah.
no, we want it flowery, and I end up banging
Well,
my head
no,
on the
that's
floor. Yeah.
yeah, that's when in the ghostwriting business, you obviously you're working for that person that you're writing for, and you want to meet their requirements and their audience that they've worked their butts off to gain, and
Yeah.
have a good name in the business. But there's just sometimes when I come in the story, and it's like I'll send it in. You're too dark, Suzanne. It's too dark. Take that out. You're not writing a true crime book here.
Yeah,
And
I get that. I
and I
get that
find
as well.
myself
Yeah.
doing that sometimes. Yeah, it's like a little rough, dark around the edges. You need to soften it a little bit. And I'm like, I may have a bit of a reputation for being
Defensive.
persistent, a bitch. I don't know, but no, we need to do it this way. It'll work. Blah 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 blah. And I'm not right all the time, but most of the time,
Yeah.
I get the job done, and it does well in the market.
But
And
what
there's
I always
times
say
it's like,
is,
why?
yeah, exactly. Like
Go ahead.
I've had that conversation with editors where they're like, you can't pull this off, and I'm like, I
Right.
know this is gonna work, so leave it in. And I normally have to really, 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 really fight to keep stuff in sometimes. And
Hmm.
you like the I just got told that one of my books has gotten completely re-edited, and I'm gonna have to read it and actually make sure it's still the story I was telling, because according to them there was
Right.
holes and it didn't make complete sense. Um, but I have a feeling when I go into it, I'm gonna have to go back and say, no, I want that back in and I want this back in, because it
Right.
ties in with the series, and I'm
Hmm.
creating a series, not just a one-off book. Um,
Right.
and I think for me, I get told that I'm stubborn, I'm egotistical, I'm aggressive. I mean, these are bad traits in their opinion of me, but I fight for my characters. I fight for the
Hmm.
work that I am physically creating, because nobody else is going to fight for us. And
Right.
that's what I always say to people. fight for your characters, fight for your story, because nobody else is going to say that to you. And it's you at the end of the day that has to look that reader in the eye
Mm-hmm.
and answer the questions. Like if something's
Right.
not making sense, either get rid of it, rewrite it, think of the person that's reading it, because they're not living in your head. They're not living with you. They can't ask you a bunch of
Well,
questions, and nor
that's
should
it.
they.
They and I tell my husband that a lot. I had written, I think it was a novella for one of the holidays. I don't know if it was Christmas, Mother's Day, whatever, but he never reads, and he was reading that, and he said, "You just ended it too quickly."
Yeah,
So the next morning, I went over it again, went over the ending, and I'm like, he's right. And I redid the ending, had him read it again, and then I went ahead and submitted it. But I think sometimes for me, when you get to that last 50 pages or however you write, we go by word count. You
yeah,
want
we
to get,
do.
you're done.
We go by word count. Yeah,
Yeah, we're finished. We're done. We want to move on to the next story. But I'm guilty of being real pushy with that. No, it needs to stay that way because.
yeah,
But when someone, especially someone who I know isn't going to, lie to me, my husband is, if he says, and he doesn't read much, if he says if something's lacking, then I'll listen to him
yeah.
because he's not going to butter me up just because,
That's the one
I
thing
read
I can
the
say
story.
about working with Joe is if I turn to him and say, I don't know if this ending works, he will go and he'll read the ending, and then he asks me to come on the phone, and I'll run down the story up to the point he's read to, and he'll say to me, "Yeah, you're right, it doesn't work," or if you change just this little bit here, that'll fix it. Like he doesn't.
Hmm.
He's really good at not sugarcoating stuff for me, and I think
Hmm.
that's made my transition to writing scripts and working with somebody that's usually I don't, this isn't me treating my own, but most of the time I'm in a room with editors, and I've had my literacy agent tell me to dumb myself down a bit because it upsets the editors if you appear smarter than them, right? So, and I do, right? And it because in this industry, that with editors, sometimes you have to dumb yourself down a bit so that the conversation goes
That
a
is
bit
so
better.
weird that you said that.
Yeah.
Dumb yourself down because I should get my husband to come in here and he'd swear on it. When I go to work in my office, I'll say, walking in the door and say, well, I got to go dumb down for a while and write,
Yeah.
this story. And, we laugh and I do call it dumb down
But that
because,
is what we do with a lot of these editors. So I'm used
yeah,
to being one of the smarter people in the room who has to play dumb to get what she needs done.
yeah.
And then working with this script writer or the script doctor, he's actually 100 times smarter than I am. So it's almost like the
Oh, wow.
intimidation level goes up a one for me anyway, because then I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, so I'm not. The first thing he did was he told me not to play dumb with him, which I really appreciate. And then,
Right.
we kind of went from there. But it was just that it was like such a breath of fresh air to have him
Hmm.
say, you can be as smart as you want with me, or you can be, but just don't act dumb. Like,
Hmm.
because I had explained to
Yeah.
him, like, I'd only done it for a wrestling show before, or at least I'd only ever admitted to doing it for a wrestling show. So I'd gone to the wrestling show, and the promoter had said, look, you can't appear overly intelligent because you're going to put the wrestlers off. So I had dumbed myself down, and I regretted it from the day that I did it, but I thought that I was doing the right thing because the guy paying me had asked me to do it. And of course,
Hmm.
my friend took me aside and he goes, no, you should never have done that. Never ever should have done that. And of course, I learned from that moment on. But I laugh
Well,
because I learned because I learned to do that at that wrestling show. I did it
mhm.
in meetings with editors ever since. And now I'm getting to that age point where I'm like, I can't be bothered to play these politic games. I can't be bothered to make myself
Right.
appear thick. I'm just going to be me. And
Hmm.
that's where these sort of bad traits are now following me because they're like, oh, she's bitchy, she's stubborn, she thinks she knows it all. I don't know
Hmm.
it all. I know I don't bloody know it
No.
all. but I know my
No,
story, I know how my characters think, and I am going to defend, my
mhm,
decisions.
right. Well, I think with work, the ghostwriting business, I think you have to kind of have a give and take
Yeah,
with the editors because they know who you're representing, and if they say this is we don't need this, cut this, chop
yeah,
this out. It's to me, I would probably feel a lot differently if my name were on that book, but it's like if that's what makes you happy, then I'll do it, and I'll come in, and I'm a fast writer. I'll redo this, that, or the other,
yep.
and I don't mind. I don't mind. I don't have to do that a lot, but as I said, if my name were on the book, I would probably be a little more aggressive in that area as
Yeah.
far as cutting. And I do have a little more say over the covers of the books now because they
I
were so
don't.
done.
That's the thing that's bothering me now is that's all changed. So I don't
Hmm.
have any say over the book covers. I almost have to
Hmm.
accept what I'm given. And
Yeah.
that bothers me because a lot of the time it doesn't
Well,
look right, or I think it's too cluttered, or I think, there's 100 different ways that they could go with it, and it maybe not my vision for it. But I've now learned to go, yeah, that's great. And do the big
hmm,
smile. Well,
right.
inside I'm thinking, oh my God, this is awful. But
Yeah.
that's just
You
part of
know,
the business now where, you have to know what hills to die on and what ones not so much
well,
worth
you
dying
do. And
on.
I think as a reader and a writer, when you go into a bookstore and this is my experience, and I have owned a bookstore. People look at the covers
Yes.
first. I mean, obviously, you know an author, you like them, you're going to zone right in on their work. But I always looked at the covers before I purchased a book. Then I would read inside the jacket, and yay, it's good. No, it's not. But to me, that was a big drawing point, and it got to the point with some of the books. I said, you need something different other than flowers and a porch on these books. They need to show something that's inside that story.
Yeah.
And the last, I don't know, 10 or 12 books, I would say, they've been good about that, about the art department. You give them a little bit of a blurb or whatever and an idea, and they've been pretty good about working that out with their department. But it's just it's a process. It is a
It is. It
process,
is.
and it's you
I
get
mean,
asked, well, how do you do that? How do you write a book? Well, I don't know. I
you
just
just
sit
sit
down
down
and
and
do
do
it,
it.
and I
Yeah.
yeah, that's all the advice I could give anyone. And I have a lot of people ask me that all. Where do you get your ideas from? And I think I was a born writer. I've been writing since I was 6. It's
I'm the
just
same.
that's
Yep.
my makeup. That's how I started reading when I was 3, and I read Little Women. I had no clue what it meant or anything, but I sounded out the words
Yeah.
phonetically and read the whole book. And of course, later when I was older and could understand it, I read the book. But I was taught by my grandmother, I called her Mimi, to read from the Bible.
Yeah.
And I was just so interested in the reading process itself that it never left me.
No.
So, and I used to make up ghost stories to my sister and she was older than me, try to scare her. And I think it's just the summation of who you are,
Yeah.
your ability. Obviously, anybody can learn grammar and structure and
Unless
what
you're
we require
dyslexic.
to.
Yeah. And then it's
Well,
just
that's
hell.
true. That's it. And I sometimes think that I am because I'll reread a sentence and I think, damn, that's backwards. Let me switch it. I didn't
I
write it
do.
out
I
the right
write
way. But
backwards as well, or I write really clunky and I can't see it, and then somebody points it out,
yeah,
and then I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's clunky. What was I
yeah,
thinking? Yeah,
yeah. And you need another set of eyes sometimes because in your head what that should
and you
look
autocorrect it
like.
in your head as well, which people don't realize when you're writing. You
Hmm.
autocorrect because
Hmm.
we are.
Oh, yeah.
We're playing the film in our heads, but our hands are writing down what
Hmm.
we're seeing. And of course, you do miss
Or
stuff
that.
with that,
Hmm.
because you get so
Yeah.
close to it.
Well, you do. And it's just, it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe an artist that draws or something, that paints.
Yeah,
They know if it's a painting that, see, I saw the Mona Lisa one time at the Louvre in Paris,
yeah,
and I was just so unimpressed. Years and years, oh, this painting, this, that.
yep.
Monet, I was impressed with. The Mona Lisa, no.
No, I was
So
the
it's
same.
it's just what's in their head, and it's what I like and think is good. Maybe somebody else won't, but after years and years of doing this, you know your market, you know what you can do, and you also know what you can't do. But sometimes you do have to step over the line and be a little bit insistent. No, this needs to be here because it just has to be here. And
Yeah.
read the whole damn book, read the whole thing, and then tell me
Don't
to
you hate
take
it
that
though when
out.
an editor starts emailing you and they're only 10 pages in and you're like, you didn't read the whole thing, did you? No.
Hmm.
Go
Oh,
read the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing, then email me. Like I always have that argument
Or
of just,
or rewrite chapters in the middle of the novel. Like, we need you to do 14, 15, and 16 over. Oh,
yeah.
okay. Well, gee, then that changes the rest of the book. And I
Yeah.
had to do that once in like 2 weeks. So it was like, I don't like to do this, but if you think it makes it a better book, then, you pay me very well. I will do that.
Yeah.
But it's aggravating. It's
It is.
aggravating.
It
But
is.
your my own personal writing is so different than my the type of people I do ghost writing for.
Yeah.
So it's
I almost feel
it's
like
just.
ghostwriters have the worst jobs in our industry because you've got to
Hmm.
almost look at the writer you're writing for, match their
Hmm.
voice, match their style. And it's almost like
Oh, yeah.
trying to figure out, well, how would they see this and see the
Hmm.
story at the same time? And that's why I have a huge respect for ghostwriters because I
Hmm.
know that that's not easy to do. And,
Well, it's not, because you have to learn their voice
yeah,
and write like they do to a degree, and not let yourself intrude.
yeah,
And I've done that many times in novels that I'm writing. I get on that little dark murder side,
hmm,
and I'm like, well, that's not really the story, but I know they're going to chop this out. And
yeah,
that's me, the author intrusion thing coming in.
yeah.
It's the Suzanne intrusion coming in.
But we all do
But
that. Yeah. I mean,
I
everybody
think,
does it.
yes, I think everybody does. And it's like, you're like you said, the keyboard is the camera to the words on the page. And
Yeah.
I don't always get it right. I'll go over and read something and reread it, and I'll ponder it. And I'm like, that's kind of, ugh, I don't like that. And I'll just delete the whole thing,
Yep.
write it again, delete it, write it again. And you know when to stop. You know when you've got it right. And I don't always have it right the first shot out.
Now, see that's where I'm going to disagree with you because I used to think I had it right. I used to
Hmm.
trust that I had it right in myself, and now I found out that I have a tendency to fiddle with it more than I should. Because somebody
Yeah.
pulled me up for it the other day and they're like, stop fiddling with it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, but there is that kind of bit inside of you that's striving constant perfection. And you're never going to get it.
Hmm.
But you still have
Yeah.
that thing inside of you that says, well, you could do this a little bit better. Or we could
Right.
squeeze one more character in here. And yeah,
Hmm.
I'm really bad for that. And I'm having to sort of relearn to step back and go, hands off the keyboard, leave it alone. You're writing
Yeah.
out too
I,
much.
yeah, you can just write and overwrite to the point that you've lost your subject.
Yes.
And I've done that before, and I'm like going back to what I had sometimes, and it's maybe more often than not. Whoops, what did I just do here?
Oh, you're okay.
Just
You're
beep
still with
this.
us.
Oh, okay. There's something just came. I'm talking to you on my cell phone.
Yeah.
My computer's right here, and I just couldn't get it to go to your link. But you know, most of the time, I would guess in the last 15 years, my books are good on the first run. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a little editing. Obviously, I do that, and then have a reader that goes through and does, the professional edit if it needs it. But I haven't really had to do a lot of rewrites in the last few
Yeah.
years for them. I have for myself just because before I turn it in, I like that's not, I don't like that.
And
Even,
I also
my
think
name's not
for
on the book.
us as writers, like particularly if you're handing something in and you know your name's going to be on it, do you not feel like there's
Hmm.
just that little bit more pressure to make it that
Oh, yeah,
perfection level?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can't, you know, it's like horror to go online and read a review or something. And it's
I
like,
don't read
oh
them
God.
anymore. I don't. I've
No,
stopped myself. Yeah.
honestly, I don't care what the reviews are. I don't care. I used to, it bothered me when I'd look and read them wherever, Publishers Weekly, Book
Yeah.
List, the Amazon. I don't care
No.
because I know the books and the market that I write for, and I know 99% of the time the books are on the New York Times bestseller list. And if they're not, then so be it.
Yeah.
That just didn't, I don't care.
Yeah. I've
It's my
learned that.
job.
Like I had
Yeah.
to learn it because when I released a book I was really passionate about, and there was people that had put up reviews that said did not finish but never said why, or they went back and they would put in these details, and I had to say to myself, why am I doing this to myself?
Hmm. Right.
Because
Yeah.
they don't know this. They're just a normal person who's picked it up because it's been a free
Hmm.
whatever review. They haven't
Hmm.
liked it because they don't know who I am, and they're slating it for that reason only. But I had to learn that because
Yeah.
there's nobody that sits there and
Well.
mentors you through it. And that's what I love about this podcast is
Mhm.
we are mentoring all these new writers who are coming in behind us, and we're saying,
Uh-huh.
don't read reviews, because if you react to the review, you're killing your career before you start. And
Right.
you're also teaching them that there's if one style doesn't work for you, there's other areas you can try if you really are passionate about writing, but be aware of the hours you have to put in, the sacrifices you've got to make, the
Hmm.
there is hardships to it, whether we like
Hmm.
admitting it or not. Because if you when I go on the road, bless my husband, he drives because I can't drive, so he'll drive me, and he will hear in minute detail. I will read that book to him because I have to practice reading aloud with my dyslexia
Hmm.
before I do a reading
Hmm.
at any signings. And so
Hmm.
he ends up knowing the books better than the readers do. So I always
Oh
feel for him
gosh.
because I'll say to him, right, you're my sounding board because I can't work with
Hmm.
Joe because I'm on the road.
Hmm.
Let me bounce off you. And I feel so bad because he'll say, can you write any other subject? Because he does. He'll get frustrated with me. But that
Yeah. Well,
but I love
I
I
do
love
that
being
with
on the road.
Jason
He
sometimes.
doesn't. So there's
Oh,
also that
really?
kind of understanding of I like the
Yeah.
travel. I like to be on the road. I like to go see all these new places. I
Hmm.
am one of these incessant talkers outside of writing and outside of the house. I
Hmm.
love to sit and just talk to people. That also drives him a little
Right.
crazy because I will start a conversation with a stranger in the lift. Um, but saying that, I've gotten some hell of a great material over the years by doing that.
Well, yeah, yeah, I'm not bashful at all. I never have been. And,
Yeah.
I've been up against some big, big names before and just, shoot the breeze with them only for them to, come back later and we're, good friends,
Yeah.
because I don't put on airs. I am what I am. This is me. If you don't
Yeah.
like it, then I'm sorry. But I don't want to be mean to people. I don't want to hurt their feelings. I know what that's like.
Yeah.
Um, in reviews, for instance, if I rarely will write one because honestly I don't have time. I'll just click on the 5 stars if it's
Worth it,
good
yeah.
and be done with it. But I I have thick skin. You have to have thick
Yes, you do.
skin, and I do. I earned it through my life. I had a baby when I was 16,
Yeah,
and that baby is 47 now.
yeah,
She's all grown up and married, and she doesn't have children. But I went through kind of the school of hard knocks
yep.
to get where I am at today, and I didn't really have any experience as far as how to go about this. I just started doing it.
Yeah,
And as I said, I've been writing since I was 6. And I think as a writer, people, they sometimes look at me kind of like you're crazy. Well, I
I've
am
gotten that.
crazy, but
Yeah, yeah.
like, how do you make that stuff up? Or they think that if you've got a whacked out character in your story,
It's come from you.
well, are you that way?
Yep.
Well, no, I made that up. I'm not that. I'm not a killer, or I'm not a
Yeah.
sociopathic rapist or whatever.
No, but
But
they look at
you
you as if
do.
you are. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I'm like, I just make this stuff up. And then, well, where do you get your information from? And obviously research, but
Reading,
I don't go
watching
out and
stuff.
let
Yeah.
someone rate me or anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, you get a lot of people that don't get that you're just kind of made that way.
Yeah.
It's your way that you express yourself, and you know how to do
I'll
it.
hold up my hands because when a friend of mine found out, now they call it smut, okay?
Oh yeah,
Of
smut. I've
course, we all know
definitely
what
heard of
that
that.
means, but that's not the
Right.
correct terminology in our industry, but that's what they called it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they found out that I had done this excessively hot, steamy, and in their opinion, very ridiculous storyline. And they came to me and they said, "Is this your fantasies that you're playing out?" And I said, "No, I don't look at a ring and think, ooh, I could do this or that or whatever. I respect what you do in the ring, but it doesn't mean that these thoughts don't exist in females' heads." Like, and I had to sit and
Right.
explain that. But in his mind, I must be this very, you know, I must have a huge sexual appetite because I was writing this stuff. And it took
Yeah.
that person so long to get comfortable with me because they couldn't they couldn't see by the character and the persona that I put
Mhm.
on when I do the
Mhm.
erotica stuff.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I don't know if that's a badge of honor I should have that it was that believable to them
Yeah.
that they looked at it and went, "Oh, okay," or if I should
Well, I
take
would
it the
say,
other way, you
yeah,
know?
you did your job well. I would say, if
Yeah,
it has any effect on a person, they remember it. Maybe they think you're writing from experience, and who
yeah,
cares? It's your writing, and
exactly.
I just I don't get too freaked out over any of it too much. I just do my job, and
Yeah,
and
they
I
forget it's a job for us. Like that's the other thing.
it is,
You
yeah,
know, I have to
it is a
explain
job,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a job. You know, I get up in the morning, I go through my emails, and then I think, okay, what's my job today? Like, what am I writing
Right.
today? What am I planning today?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I know for I know from being a physical performer, it's the same thing.
Mhm.
Like you go, you act a role, and then you go home. And when you close the door at night, that's the end.
Right.
But for
Yeah.
writers, we can't close the door because a lot of these stories, they follow us into our dreams, they follow us into dinner, they follow us on
Well,
date
yeah,
nights.
you're always
You know,
working. Yeah, you're
you're
always
always
working,
working.
even when you're on vacation. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm the
And
same way. I
they
just
can't understand how I can't turn it off. And I'm like, well, that's just not how my brain works. Like
well, mine doesn't
I
either.
work
I mean,
every
you
day.
could look at my mouse pad or whatever here, and or
Yeah.
it's got weird drawings on it, and
Yeah.
I could write something about that if I wanted to. It's
Yeah.
just what you do. It's, like a painter, a carpenter. That's what they do. We put words onto paper and people read them. And some are successful, some aren't. It's a trial and error type of thing. And my best advice is just if anybody's interested in writing, ghost writing, start with writing before you
Yeah.
start the ghost writing because you need a little bit of experience to get the ghostwriting job.
Yeah.
And that's my advice in that area. But once you do, if you get that first job for whether it's a fiction, nonfiction, a magazine article, it doesn't matter. Do it to their
Standard.
their zone that they're in or whatever.
Yeah.
But I have been very lucky. I've been lucky enough to kind of write the books that I think her audience or their audience likes,
Yeah.
and they've been successful. And I've got a deadline. I've got a book due next month, and it's like I'm halfway finished with it. But
Yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah, I'm kind
yeah,
of I'm staring down the barrel and thinking, I not only have the script to finish, but I've got a book that I've
mm.
got to finish, and I now that because of all the changes that's happened in the script, is going to change the rest of my series.
Oh
And
yeah,
I'm like, oh well, that whole second book I'm halfway through is just useless now. I need to throw it out, and I need to redo this whole
yeah.
thing again. And I think people don't realize that quite as well
Oh
as we
no,
do.
I don't. I don't think so. I don't think so either. And it's like, oh well, you can go in there and cut and paste a few paragraphs here and there, but no,
You
you
don't.
sometimes you just have to.
Yeah.
And in your case, because it's a movie, we had a book turned into a movie for that dumb
Yeah.
Hallmark channel. Not
Yeah.
dumb Hallmark. Let me retract that. For the Hallmark channel that a lot of people love.
Yeah.
And they can butcher a story. Let's just say that to
Oh,
make
they
it
can.
so
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
bubble
learning that.
gummy.
Yeah.
And, it's just they're too predictable. They're cutesy,
Yeah.
but if I'm going to watch TV, I'm not going to watch that unless
I laugh
I'm
because
forced to.
there is an incredible author I know personally. Her name's Terry, and Terry's, she does a lot of these sort of prince and royalty kind of stories, and her
Hmm.
stories have steam in them because they're part of the Mills
Hmm.
and Boon line, so there's steam in them.
Right,
But you
right,
watch them at
right.
Hallmark, and I'm like, well, they just cut a quarter of that book
They
out.
chopped it
Like
apart.
this is not going to make sense to anyone that's not read
Hmm.
her stuff.
Hmm.
And I just sit there and I go, oh, and that's why I stopped. I stopped watching it.
Right.
But I'll tell you,
Yeah,
I'll tell,
they're too cutesy.
yeah. But I'll tell you, there is a series of films coming out now that I think are incredible. There was Beautiful Disaster, which is out on Amazon Prime, and that was
Let me
actually,
write that down.
yeah, that was off of a book, a fighter book that came out
Hmm.
many moons ago, and the
Ooh,
writer is incredible, and I was so relieved that she stayed on as a consultant because she kept it as close to that novel as she could, and it really
good. Yeah.
worked. And the franchise that I've been watching is the After franchise, and that is a series of films between the
Hmm.
leading male and the heroine, but you never quite get the happy ending. There's always something that pulls them apart in
Yeah.
the end.
Right.
They've done 5 of these. And I mean,
Hmm.
to think that these are, okay, they're not huge budget films, but they're big
Hmm.
enough that they've had 5 of them. And that's kind of what
Well,
we're
yeah.
looking to do
Yeah.
with Waking is having sort of between 6 and 8 in our little franchise that will tie all these
Hmm.
characters together and create the world that we want to do.
Hmm.
And I'm
Right.
so happy to see that there is these rom-coms that are, well, they're not rom-coms, but these romance films that are coming out that have
Hmm.
that, those threaded cables, those wires that make it strong and make it incredible.
Right. Yeah. that make it the glue that kind of holds it together.
Yeah.
I mean, they're fine. I don't mind reading one because a lot of them, the story isn't the romance, but it's part of the story.
Yeah.
And I think every story has a romance of some type
Well,
in it.
yeah. I mean,
Maybe
romance is in
a little,
everything nowadays. You know.
well, it is. And I mean, you have a relationship, whether you're in a World War II, you're in a camp, and
Yep.
there's always relationships there.
Yeah,
And
of
the
course.
background is not ideal, but most things that you read, there is that in there. Now they might not go into the sexual side of the relationship, just the emotional side,
Of
and
course, yeah.
and it fits that story. But oops, crazy battery's about to go dead here.
No problem.
But it's just part of life, and you want your books, unless you're writing a fantasy novel, to be
Realistic.
somewhat
Yeah.
realistic. Yeah, and that, I mean, you're married, I'm married. Do you have kids? I've got, my two kids are grown, and and but you could, I find now with the books that I'm writing, I'm learning new things of this age.
Yeah.
Now, I don't write, things that I personally don't agree with. I mean,
Yeah.
there's all that politics and crap nowadays, and I did have one agent tell me, Suzanne, you need to write and be inclusive, and I'm like, well, I do, but I'm not going to write inclusive just for you. I will,
Yeah.
if it's in
You
the
need to be true to
story,
what you're
of
doing.
course I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to make it about a race or a gender. I mean, that could be part of the story, but not the story. I mean, that there's a market for those stories too.
Yeah.
There is, and I don't have anything against it because there's people out there that read. That's their life. They want to read a book about it, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I have no problem with that at all.
Yeah.
But in the work that I'm doing, it just wouldn't fit.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't fit. And I'm like, nah, I can't do that in
Well,
these
I have
books.
a feeling that once our film takes off, that you'll be dipping your own toe into the wrestling romance world, I'm sure.
Well, after speaking with you, I'm going to look forward to it.
Exactly. And the great thing is,
Well, I
you can give
will.
me a phone and I'll hook you up with some wrestlers and
Okay,
they'll get your accuracy going.
there you
They
go.
love
Hey, I'm
talking,
game.
so it's a fantastic
Yeah,
thing. But no, you
yeah.
survived the Book and Life podcast. I'm so honored that you've come on today and that you've been able to share kind of the ghostwriting experience and then obviously what you think of things that are changing everything, because everything is changing now. Publishing has just become a runaway train again, which we all needed, because during the pandemic it died
Right.
for the longest time. So now
Yeah.
there's a runaway train again. I think we're all jumping on as quickly as we can. But
Hmm.
no, it's been fantastic to have you, and I really look forward to having you back.
Well, thank you. It was a privilege to get to talk to you and get to know you. And I want to read your books.
Well, I definitely will arrange to have Summer of Him, which is our more steamy experience into wrestling, sent over to you by the publisher, because I'm sure she'll enjoy hearing feedback
Oh,
on
yes,
that.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that. And in turn, I can send you something.
Oh, I can look forward to that. I need something to read
All
actually,
right.
because it's weird on this podcast. I normally get tons of books in for the podcast, but I
Uh-huh.
sometimes just like to put those books aside and say, okay, well that's just work reading. I want something to just
Hmm.
read to enjoy. Even though I have a
To
library in my
enjoy.
house, I still like to.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all
You,
do.
yeah.
We all do.
Yes, absolutely. We all do. You have to stray off the beaten path sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm definitely one of those chicks. But no, so
Me
next
too.
week, guys, we've got another hot guest coming on, and you're not going to want to miss out on them. So make sure you come back, stay safe, and have another great week.